When do you start your classes? Oh, okay. Is it mostly that online course I saw, or do you do in-person classes too? Oh, okay. Is it mostly that online course I saw, or do you do in?
All right. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to the Nervous Ghost Press virtual event for the waiting room. We're excited. This is the journal. Excited to have it. Excited that it's alive and doing well. We have great speakers today. As always, this is Matthew Mejia coming at you live. We're excited. I have a few things I want to say today. As always, Nervous Ghost Press exists for the arts and the artists. We exist for the community. What we are alone and what we are together, we are strong. If you are interested in learning more about us, you can follow us on all of the social medias on your screen now, and at Nervous Ghost Press Instagram, Nervous_Ghost Twitter, or now X, Nervous Ghost Press Facebook, and of course Nervous Ghost Live on YouTube. There is so much that I want to get into, and that we don't have all the time in the world. But one of the big things I want to speak about today, and then maybe in our Q&A later, and everybody can always send us your questions, ask us your burning thoughts, your philosophical inquiries, and everything else. If you are not one to ask questions, you can just send some positive notes, some vibes, some smiley faces and emojis in the chat. All that kind of stuff is really, really nice to see. It's great to engage with one another. Art is and always will be something that I believe and the press believes saves our lives, brings us together. It is our greatest unifier. It it heals generational wounds and traumas. It's a way for us to connect with those that we've never met before. It's a way for us to bring people together from all different parts of the globe and the world and the universe. And art is a tool that we can use when we think about community and mental health and how we advocate for those of us who are hurting, those of us who are here together, and those of us who need an outlet. We have an outlet. Email me. I always say this 24/7. I'll always reply, or I'll try to reply as often as I can. Sometimes I miss it, of course. But if you need a space to work, if you need a space to clear your head, to write, we have 2 computers in the space. We have an empty desk. There's a cool rug, carpet, rug. It's really nice looking. There's internet, no Wi-Fi, but there's AC, and so you can come, you can write, you can get whatever's in your chest out, put it on the page, paint, anything artistic, anything that is expressive. And so I hope that you do. I hope that you invite or email me. I hope that you are always expressing yourselves in a positive, in a healthy way, and proving that together we're strong. And so our first speaker, and all the speakers today can introduce themselves a little bit. I don't know all of them. I told them that I didn't want to make some fake, kind of like, oh, this person is awesome. I'm sure they are all awesome, but I don't want to say it until I really truly know. Of course, can't have any liars up here. And so introduce yourselves, anything you want to share your work. I'm excited to listen. Follow along if you have it. Get a copy, www.nervousghostpress.org. And so it is with much pleasure to introduce our first speaker, James Kroll Jackson.
Hello, thank you for having me. This is awesome, and you seem to know how to put on like good events and run a good lit mag. Excited to be here. I'm a Pittsburgh-based poet. I work in film production, and I have 3 chapbooks. Most recently, Count Seeds with Me from Ethel Zine and Micro Press. Before that was Our Past Leaves through Kelsey Books, and The Frayed Edge of Memory from Writing Nights Press. I'll start with the poems that I got published in The Waiting Room. First one is called FWIW, which stands for What It's Worth. All the days of work must one day mean something, being the bastard children of capitalism, camouflaged labor, fingers rough from wanting to swim financial freedom's waters, a belief formed from looking skyward, a cosmic agriculture, roots ever present beneath and above the stadiums, what temporal monuments we return to day after day. And the second poem in The Waiting Room was called Tournament of Bachelors. Shuffleboard in Tampa is sliding into the DMs of a box of saltines and eating each stack whole. If you dominate, otherwise, you drink leftover juice from a friend's wedding while waiting for what you wanted forever on the coast of happiness, the cusp of sweet custard overflowing with berries. I'm going to read a random selection of other poems. This one's called Trust. I did not listen to my inner monologue when it told me to stay home and watch The Novice. I went to Trace Brewing when it was bright, but you sat in the dark when I needed light. I said one drink only. Then on the 2-block walk back, the clouds were down. They felt attached to you, and I kept stepping on plastic bags and scrunched up napkins. To arrive home, I had to bisect my conscience and wait. How much of myself to give after giving? The water tower in the distance, a perpetual blue balloon. This poem is called Beer Pong in Your Basement. I was new to this new kind of longing, sticky all my fingers on red fingernail cups. But I was a visitor, I was a loner. I lived in my car, a couch was a luxury, 4 cats purred and clawed at me. I couldn't sink anything into the drinks. I sank but made myths. I missed everyone in Akron. Everything that happens to you sticks to you. Swish there was a way to live in all places at once: Pittsburgh, Columbus, Akron, Los Angeles. My memories are mine and they are selfish. I cling to what I forget, which is what I drink away, which is all the spills over all the years I haven't yet wiped clean. This next poem I'm going to read is called Rabbit. Went to Thursdays with a friend who quit boot camp, but hates this bar, so left. I am good at waiting in darkness, alone, drinking. Other friends come, but are clung on by creepers. I woke up today by Port O'Brien Plays, and suddenly we're on the precipice of another Ohio summer. I high five Rabbit, aka High Five Guy, who is an Eagle Scout. He buys us shots of Crown and Coke, then throws his glass into the air, aiming for the roof. But there is a hole in the roof, and the glass follows gravity's stringent rules and shatters on the kaleidoscope everywhere. The bald, black-eyed bouncer points a finger, and we are back on the streets, the future still shards in our powerful palms. This poem is called I Wait for the Gate to Open After Work and Cicadas Sing All the While. It has been 17 years since I went to work this morning. I am ready to party with 10 billion members of my closest family. The moon's red clay, the sky a lavender, making me uncomfortable. The boss who stresses me out said today, stress will kill you, man. That's why I spend all my free time trying to relax as hard as I can. God, this city is loud tonight with hospital vibes, drums and hums, throes of let me in your arms so I can drink. I miss the stranger side of living. I tried to do a special thing this morning before my shift. I wanted a massive mocha to help me be alive again. I mailed a postcard and left in morning breeze, but I left my keys inside. I had to wake you. It was too late. I had to fly across the bridge to my manual slumber for the day, thick in the trees. To pass the time, I wanted something sweet to drink, and so the rain. I'm going to read a couple poems from, this is Count Seeds with Me, which is my most recent book. I'm going to read a poem called Some Crimson Planet. When I am lonely, it helps to not think of the universe. I imagine Earth buried in the darkest cemetery, a headstone with some space separating it from the next. I know there must be a tenderness quotient in the cosmos, a rose on some crimson planet blooming tall to wave at me, its petals drifting aimlessly through a garden of light years. This distance is more collective than we know. And then the initial poem from this book, Our Past Leaves, which is all about grieving and my family. This poem's called Blue Beetle. Shining in the sunlight of our driveway, I go inside to tell Dad, come see what I found. No hesitation, he squishes its golden guts out. A thing like that, he says, is nothing more than a nuisance. But I keep thinking about that beetle, impossibly one of a kind. And today I watched a boring black beetle scurry across the pavement of Goodale Park and disappear into grass. And I thought, the ground is teeming with beetles. If I just dig a hole deep enough, I might be able to apologize. Just have a couple more for you here. I have a poem called The Basement. As a kid, when my friends came over, we would become stalagmites on brown basement carpet, Nintendo controllers in hand, screen's cold glow, our lamp in the cave. My dad, one morning, stomped down the stairs and yelled to play outside. We sprinted into daylight and blackened our palms with a depressurized basketball. We made the net's swoosh sounds with our mouths, shooting the ball into a nearby branch, since the hoop was erected not on pavement but in the backyard. A dirty game of grass and dirt. Later, I learned my Uncle Zane passed away that morning. My father must have felt so temporary and small, and I wonder how long he was in the kitchen, seething about our wasted time. When he ordered us to go upstairs and outside, he was doing the best he could to keep us from being underground. And the last poem I'm going to read you tonight. This was a poem that I wrote right after I got vaccinated for the first time in 2021. When I thought that when we all thought that the end of the pandemic was going to be coming soon, but now. So this poem is called "Now That the End Is in Sight." Our shared strength wanes. Vaxed, we talk about the end like a peak of sunrise through the blinds. Yes, beyond winter depression, we just had depression and didn't know it. Spring sun's out and we are outside drinking. Kids graze by like the virus never happened. But I was there. I was strong. Even as a kid, finding my father crumpled on the floor and convulsing, eyes rolled to the back of his head during his stroke. I calmly dialed 911 and waited until the ambulance arrived, and I was fine the whole time. But when my sister screeched her SUV's tires into our driveway, I let go. A lifeboat. I ran into her arms, crying, not knowing how to say anything I wanted to say, and she just held me and said, "It's going to be okay." But she didn't know. This past year, I've held you to tell you it's going to be okay, but how could I know? Now that the end is in sight, we wait for the light, wilting in its arms to meet it. Thank you.
Thank you, James. A couple things that stood out to me the most. Well, there was a line, "Bisect my conscience," and then "What happens to you sticks to you," and it reminds me of the things that over time we carry, always sticks to us, either emotionally, metaphorically, philosophically, spiritually, and all the other elites, right? Everything, and we can carry it everywhere, but then we have this cool thing that we can do, and we can write about it, and we can, like I always say, we can manipulate the paper, we can take control of the paper. It doesn't have to eat us away on the inside. So thank you for joining us. I'm going to have some questions for you in our Q&A, so just prepare yourself. But thank you, James.
Thanks.
All right, up next we have Michelle M. Tukarczyk.
Again. Okay, I was born and raised in New York City and have published 3 poetry books, the most recent of which is Galapagos Islas Encantadas with Shanti Arts Publishing. I worked for many years as an English professor in Baltimore, Maryland, and now I am back in New York City writing and doing many other things I love, and I'm very happy to read tonight. I'm going to read from what was published in this great volume of The Living Room, and this first one is called "Questions for the Grandfather I Never Knew." Did you peacefully go to Rockland State Hospital, a therapeutic suburb, submit to electroshock therapy like you submitted to Ellis Island inspectors who pried into your mouth and scalp? Had your days gotten heavier, your body become less able to move across the city, the room, the bed? Did you devolve suddenly as a thunderstorm, or slowly as tiles cracking on the bathroom floor? Had Grandma told you she missed her parents, yearned for the sweep of the tall summer grasses, as if her longings resembled what you felt or could not feel, staring into darkness, light, darkness? Had you wrapped your arms around your legs, held on to your body, present if petrified. Illiterate, had you lived with the radio on, searching for clues to the family in Poland? Are they alive? Do they have food? Their home? Were these the questions that pushed you to lock yourself within yourself? Or were you driven to internal exile by the sum total of your 50 years that never reached your dreams of your American life? In shock therapy, did you lose the memories that haunted you or the memories that soothed you? Could you care? This second poem is also based on a childhood, well, it's based on a childhood memory, but has resonance in the present. Reading maps. Running eyes and fingers over the map, looking for my grandparents' first country, looking for distinctly colored, clearly bordered European space. Its name etched in like a tattoo. Unable to find it, I seized on the consonants of my surname that chokes English speakers, Czechoslovakia. I ran to my dad yelling, I know where we're from. No, we're Ukrainian. A green mass along Russia's southern border, labeled in small print, Ukrainian SSR. My nationality only an adjective. Years later, Ukraine claimed its name, stretched out east to west, land clearly delineated. My ancestry, a space I could trace and place in the world. Now bombs dilute the nation's skies. Tanks grind down the soil, fight to erase the name Ukraine. And I'm going to end with a poem that's sort of unusual with me and for me. And to be honest, I'm not sure I understand it completely, but here we go. Trauma. I was 12 when the water, with its baby blue promise, lured me in. No swimmer, I walked till the sand sucked me down. The water tried to swallow my cries, but the lifeguard carried me to consciousness, carried me to the shore where my limp body molded the sand as the liquid settled inside me, remained within me, waited years to find me adrift in a single bed, my boyfriend an ocean away, there to stay. Sleepless, I remembered the amber whiskey in my parents' cabinet, eyes closed, hands holding the shot glass like a chalice. I swallowed. Liquid warmth cleansed my throat, rippled through my body. I walked to my room, but I cannot walk away. The liquor is an undertow. Fighting is futile, so I let it carry me, hoping I'll be captured by a pair of tanned arms or float to a space where I leave no mark and nothing marks me. Years pass, but age doesn't matter. Days don't matter. It's the same sequence, gulping from glasses, waking in sweats, wanting to cry out, but being tugged down. Humans can't live here. I know as I kick and stretch my arms for the unreachable, the moment before the child waded into the water. Thank you.
Nice. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, Michelle, something, and I'm always reminded of, or when I read your work specifically, I'm reminded of how sometimes I try to get very philosophical just in life. I always ask questions all the time. I try to understand why everything is and what it's not and what it isn't and everything in between. But I think a lot about perspectives and how with social media nowadays, with technology the way it is, we're able to kind of look back in time and see our relatives when they were our age and younger and all these other things were technically without technology and naturally we wouldn't be able to. And it's a cool thing that we have these days to really see people in a real light, in a real sense. And your work just, it made me think about that. I almost went into my whole rabbit hole, of course, but thank you again. Thank you, Michelle. All right, up next we have Michael Lloyd Gray.
Hello, everybody. I just unmuted, so everybody, you can hear me now, right? Okay, good. How's this sound check? All right. So I'm not going to read my story because it's a really long story, and really, it speaks for itself. I would just say, read it, and if you have any questions about it later or want to comment on it, I'd be happy to, do that by email, or if you've already read it, I'd be happy to do it, tonight. What I really thought I would do instead is regale you with some waiting room blues on guitar, just a few bars, because that's probably something different, for one of these events. And I'd been working on something just in the last couple days that I can throw together. I don't know why my screen is so dark, because it's getting dark here in Michigan, and I turned on a couple lights, but it doesn't seem to help much. I don't know why that is. It's crazy. I mean, if I put my hand up, you can, see it. So anyway, we'll go with voice. So I'll just play a few bars of Waiting Room Blues, and then I want to talk about the story, the genesis of the story, and the role of memory in the writing process, I've been an English professor for 25 years, and a couple years ago, I quit full time at a college in South Carolina, and I came back to my house that I kept here in Michigan, and I'm just teaching part time now at Kalamazoo Valley College, and it's giving me more time to write and more time to play guitar. I'm a guitar collector. I have 12 electric guitars now, and but let me just see what you think about these blues. It's kind of a different kind of paced blues, and I'm trying out a new thumb pick. So if I screw up, we're gonna blame it on the thumb pick, right? So and it's getting so dark that I can't really see the fretboard right now. So it's kind of hard to play when you can't really see where your hands are going. So anyway, that's Waiting Room Blues, and it'll evolve more, and I'll add more chord progressions to it, and it'll be nice. So let me talk about The Man Who Can Summon Ocean Whitefish, the story that's appearing. I wrote that story a long time ago. And then recently, like in the last year or so, I revised it. and made it better. But you know, here's the thing about memory and the role it plays in the writing process. That story starts with a beloved cat who dies, who's found dead. And then that's the kind of the spark or the genesis for telling this much bigger story about a lonely and desperate man who finds himself making some decisions that he didn't want to make and that he regrets. And it almost spins out of control into a terrible tragedy. It's only averted from tragedy really by the thinnest of margins. And so a long time ago, before I'd even gone to graduate school and got my MFA at Western Michigan University, which is here in Kalamazoo, there was a cat that came around my house, lived outside. It was a great cat. And I fed it and watered it, and sometimes it would come in, but it stayed outside, and it was definitely an outside cat. Tough cat, very tough cat. Friendly to me, but tough to other cats. But anyway, one day I was backing out of my driveway and I looked over in the side yard and I saw something and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was something wrong. So I went over and it was that cat and he was dead. I took him to a vet and they said, if you would like to do an autopsy, we could do that. But you know, probably what happened is it's led a hard life, a tough life, and probably died of a heart attack. You know, do you want to do an autopsy on an already dead cat? And I said, no, I don't really need to know. And then many years went by, but the memory of that cat always stayed a very profound memory in my head. You know, and memories of tragedies like that do that. They find a place in our psyche and they stay there. And periodically it's like they turn on a light to remind us of what happened. And you know, at first, all you really feel is this emotional pull. You feel sad that this cat that you loved died so unexpectedly. And that goes on for a long time. But now, if you're a writer, it gets complicated because eventually a writer gets perspective on the things that happened to them earlier in their life. That's why it's always a good idea, I think, for writers to write about the past when the past is really well in the past, because they haven't really gained perspective yet. And so I think what happened is that at some point, enough years went by that I would no longer automatically feel the pain of losing that cat. And I've lost, you know, a few of them over my life. And eventually you make peace with the loss. And I think at some point I realized, okay, you know, it no longer makes me want to cry that poor cat died, because it's been a long time, and you know, I'm okay with it now. And then you realize, but you know, I'm a writer, and a writer is looking for something to do, is looking for a story to tell. And I realized that finally I reached the point of perspective where I didn't have to get bogged down in remembering the loss of the cat as an emotional incident, that I can now look at it much more clinically and ask myself, what kind of a story would a dead cat be the catalyst for? And that's when I went back to the story, which literally sat for years and years, and realized that the real story to tell is not about the cat. You know, that's a page or two. The real story is how a little thing like that, relatively small tragedy like that, can push somebody to the very edge of a much bigger potential tragedy. And that's the story, you know, the big story that was really worth telling. And so I guess what I'm really trying to say is that to any writer who asks me about the relationship between their ability to tell a story and things that they remembered and experienced, is the ability to find that perspective where you're no longer experiencing the loss of one time, and you're able to see that event now as just like clay that you can literally shape, into a story that you want to tell. Let me just take us back to the 1920s for just a second. When Hemingway started writing those brilliant short stories, there were people who thought, well, maybe what this guy is really doing is just writing about what happened to him and what he saw. And that's not what was going on at all. Because if you knew anything about his life, you knew that he took maybe a place or something he heard or something he saw, and he spun that into a whole story that never really happened, but he made it sound like it had happened, right? And that's kind of how I look at writing. I'm always drawing on things that I've, a place I've been or someplace I lived a long time ago, but I'm always mindful to make that memory just a little glimmer, a shard, a tiny little piece of the puzzle. It's only a starting point, right? It gives me enough to create a setting or a conflict or a character, and then everything else after that is made up. After that, you're just literally pulling it out of thin air. So I guess the bottom line is that memories are a powerful tool for a writer, but you got to know how to use them. You got to get past the emotional component of remembering something from the past, and being able to do like a doctor in an operating room, I suppose. Leave emotion at the door, pick up the scalpel, and do the operation. So that's my 2 cents for this evening on fiction. Bear in mind, I've been up since 6 a.m. It is getting late in Michigan, and probably my brain is not working as well as it was 10 hours ago. So thanks for listening.
Thank you. Where am I? Yeah, I agree. Thank you for the Waiting Room Blues. That was really cool. We should make an entire Waiting Room Blues album. That would be something.
Well, I'll finish that and then hand it to you.
Absolutely. And as far as writing, and when you go out and get your copy and you read the stories or read the poetry, you can really get a sense of what the words mean, and you can feel it in the moment while you read the stories. And as far as memory, I think memory is the way you explained it is fantastic. And there are so many things that I have memories of that I don't want to write about. And I've never articulated it quite like you did, but it's basically the same thing where I'm sitting there, I want to write about it, but then the emotions are too heavy, they're too strong still, it's too fresh, and it doesn't go quite where I want to go because the memories, the emotions are taking over instead of our brain and us and our hand and our pen and so on. So being able to look at it when you write with a new perspective and when you gain that perspective, I think is great practice. So thank you, Michael.
Sure, thank you.
All right. Up next in our day 2 of the Waiting Room Journal virtual events is M.D. Berkman.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me, Matthew. I'm M.D. Berkman. I'm in New York. I write poetry and fiction and reimagined fairy tale, which I perform sometimes with puppets. No puppets tonight. I'm going to be reading poetry that I have in the waiting room. And on August 23rd, I'm going to be reading from the short story that I have, Hidden Lake. But tonight, poetry and memory. White room. The room was upstairs and cheaper, sheets washed white with jasmine soap. I hung up a map of the world and lay while sunlight picked a journey. Shutters open, the girl next window and I passed a smoke, tracing roofs in the dusk with our toes through tremulous calls to prayers. Go to Jogja for love and batik, a happy couple in Bali told me. I went to the shop where they met, looking for the same pattern they had on their bed. And there was the man himself. I let him drape my bedstead with color and squeeze from my breast its false milk. I chose the hotel as sanctuary, white porcelain Mandy gleaming. It was there I lost last innocence when I found the white nits nesting. Smuggler. In my daydreams, you are walking around the corner to my surprise. I see you coming blocks away. A lean blur with a white blonde crown, your smile ahead of your body. Just the way we re-met in Bangkok, you wearing that pink flowered shirt I hated for loving. I don't scold you. We always found it best by chance. In my night dreams, I receive letters. I love you written in red over the lines crossed out by a censor's thick black pen. They arrive this uncertain, sexless week before moving in with a safe lover. Repacks boxes of blue pages you sent for a while years ago after the last time we parted. And I'd like to read a couple of poems that were published in 2020 in the Comstock Review. This is from the fall in New Orleans. Afterward, smelling like the river, perpetually of shrimp and sugar, I sit on the balcony, spread-legged to dusk's boiled-down heat. Birds flit up the back gardens, their spun cross paths catching the last interest of light and breeze. I haven't worn underwear all week. I've been here before, lusting after jumpy long-back boys, but letting them share only the pleasures of the mouth. This time I show my man. We swoon over trout at Galatoire's. We strut to second-line rhythms. We squabble even while caressing, never questioning why. Bourbon is hardly necessary. Turning boats before it, night has seeped in from the river, along the shuttered streets. Termites swarm the gas lamps by the convent gate. Downstairs in the room first given us, they're replacing an infested wall, using no blueprint other than memory. And for my last poem, a short one. Rockaway Rip. Blood spot beak, puffed out chest, gull of the yellow eye, ready as a husband to peck, beside me as I lie half in sand and water. Any crumb and he will scream to all of his dominion. Get up and swim away. Better to be ripped by the sea than pinned by a selfish lover. Thank you.
Thank you. Everybody, that is MD Berkman. Come back on the 23rd to hear more. Get your copy again, www.nervousghostpress.org. I just personally, and it's really great when we have these events, because personally I just love hearing people speak. And it's great reading the work, but being able to watch them, read it, hear the tone, hear the voice, get a history behind it. And I'm very excited maybe one day to see the puppets. And it made me think, and I have questions now for the Q&A. I'm not going to ask yet, but about the different genres, the different tools that we have at our disposal when we're working on art, the different ways we can tell stories and write everything out of us. And I'm excited to ask about it in a little bit. So Just be prepared. Thank you. Thank you very much. Our next our next speaker today, we have 2 left, and then we have our Q&A discussion. So if you have any questions, Instagram, text, email, Twitter, or in the YouTube comments, ask away. Anything that you're curious about, any positive messages you want to send out, feel free. Please welcome Julia.
Hi everyone, Julia here. Yeah, I mostly just write poetry. I started writing when I was about 14 years old. It was a poetry club, and I just found that everything that I was carrying inside, I didn't know how heavy it was until I put it on the paper. And then I was able to feel light again. And poetry and music has been something that I continue to turn to stay sane, for the lack of a better word. So I'm going to start off with this poem called Agave Americana. And it's about a relationship I had with someone. All right. The agave sap from your honey brown iris traps my logic to a no state. I drink the mezcal that your searching eyes distill. 34 years of fermentation reflected by the taste of your pineapple lips digging through my yielding flesh as the pinch distracts the tracks of your sugar flow. Each crevice of my bloodstream is caught off guard by your harsh, slow running course. I must blow out after a shot of your eyes, just so the taste does not overstay its stay in the mouth of my oval lens. Oh, I know how our drunken raucous nights hide the subtext to our locked glare, though the intent be concealed by our whispered central verses, the loci of universes, the properties of our performed and attained identities are redefined to fit the genetic mapping of our sought, exchange extremities that are compromised by the framework of this lust. All that can be trusted is this moment's wordless communication. The psychological figment to the imagination is such a striking refractive visualization. Soft kisses under the mediated moonlight. The beam hazily peeks through the heavy Nautica rayon drapes that hang along the chipped wooden windowsill, providing a muffled visual to the entrapment of sound waves that expand across the vacuum space of your living room. The echoing waves ripple through the ambiance that surrounds as I recite poetry or strum my guitar to the B-sides of tapes, fueling the vehicles of sound that crash against the curves of your face, forcing air molecules to rise and fall at a periodic rate. Fate is coordinated by points across this interrupted plane. This steel space dances along a crazed, dark state of familiarity where your touch erases time. The caves of your pupils elongate the path through the yellow brick road of green differentiation, the discoloration of complementation, a reversal of photosynthetic progression. But I stop myself from getting lost in you, so I start retracing tracks, blindly walking down a lightless path that has no end at sight. And regrettably, there exist blueprints to our allowed existence, whose interpretation is relative to our being status, our place in space, our movement in time, our self-defined, our state of seeing. My natural ocular status, negative 0.425 on each eye, with a minor stigmatism to the left. It's unfortunate that I write life through opaque, blurred lymph-ways, faces of sinister steps, sinister routes. The venture point of venturing through Earth's transcendent curvatures that fine-tune the culprits of a sought yet impossible left ocular dominance. I am a cornea, an unchanging module forced to remain in its pictorial state along the path of the stipulated function. I can register the delicious agave Americana that finds its flipped image moving along the ordinance of movement, but it is a fleeting image that time will blur. Okay, that was pretty long. Didn't realize how long it was. I'm gonna read the poem that was in the waiting room. I submitted two of them, but I'm just gonna do one. So I'm going to read Act 3, Scene 2. And if you replace, this is usually the acting scene where everything kind of like comes together. It's a turning point of many dramas. So I decided to call it Act 3, Scene 2. A mixture of lust, unacquainted love, and deceivable resolutions. The moon is in love with the unseen clouds of vanity, the other side of the turning scene. Longing timeframes that search for the end result, for the drowned sorrows of hubris and edible complexes that kill our passions through and through, until we're left with nothing. But no, this is not the case. The moon knows not to love, but to want and not acquire, to tempt with the mystery of virginity and listen attentively as the wind gloats about her relationship with the clouds. But the wind whispers of the rain's betrayal. The moon denies her love for the clouds, or mere lust for the limited known. She has fallen silent in the presence of the wind for the purpose of mere example. So, yeah, and so I'll just read one more. I like this band called The Good Life, and one of the lyrics that always stood out to me were words left unsaid were only words. So I named my poem that, A Good Life Song, so if you want to look it up. Words left unsaid were only words, which is kind of ironic. Rewrite, that's our mode. Poetry is often the medium. Free verse is the mean. Electronic correspondence is the plane. If we're to graph the points of our written work, we'll be left with a bell curve. The hump coming from sensual exchanges, inputs to functions having to do with desire. The output always positive, a modulus no doubt. The first and second quadrant, the first and second base. Then out of nowhere, the first and second step function acknowledging the gaps between. Discreetly, deriving even oddities. If you take the derivative of velocity, you'll catch up to speed. Accelerate unto me and see it will crash. I'm ironically cautious but reckless, innocently flirtatious, clearly elusive, knowingly coy. The f of x now staying within the first and second gear, plotting the points we exhibit in the tidbits of time we share, and the time constraint is positive. Needless to say, I'm a math teacher, so you do see a lot of math incorporated in my poetry. So thank you for allowing me to share, and I look forward to hearing everyone's stuff in the upcoming meetings. Thanks.
Thank you, Julia. Yeah, math is kind of cool. I used to hate it. And then after a while, math was less about numbers and more about problem solving and thinking. And then it kind of opened it up for me. But it's nice to bring in different aspects. And that, again, that's going to be one of the questions that I have. And so for everybody out there, Julia has been to the in-person open mics, and we have a really kind of nice group of regulars that come and hang out with us, and the community is growing. I think last time there was a bunch of people there. It was amazing. And so it's proof that through art, our community grows and we connect, and we can have conversations where so many of us and everybody here today and everybody watching tomorrow and 35 years in the future, there are things that we can disagree with, and yet we still have, and I say this all the time, we connect on the inside where it matters, where it's important, through the art, the trauma, the pain, and the community and the grief that we spoke about today also. Thank you, Julia. All right, our final reader before our Q&A discussion. So if you have any questions, think about them. If any of the readers today have questions, ask them. Ask each other. Those are the greatest discussions, when you're picking each other's brains. They're so cool. But please welcome our final reader this evening, Alan Byrne.
Thank you, Matthew, for holding this reading. And I'm going to read, well, first I'm going to tell you who I am. I'm coming to you from Berkeley, California. I'm a writer. I write poems and stories, and a performer. I work with dancers and musicians. and I'm here in Northern California in Berkeley. So I want to read the poem that was included in the waiting room, and then I have a presentation for you that I'll talk about a little bit. So the poem is called My Waiting. My waiting reminds, my waiting postures, my waiting backed up, my waiting, oh yeah, my waiting fangu, my waiting halva, my waiting marvel, my waiting cosplay, my waiting Donald, my waiting fungus, my waiting off key, my waiting Dante, my waiting unlearn, my waiting, my waiting seating, my waiting did wit, my waiting wrong done, my waiting doing, my waiting washed up, my waiting my toe, my waiting bee buzz, my waiting injured. So one of the things that I do on a daily basis now is to take photos and combine the photos with words. So that's kind of a thing that the Japanese borrowed from the Chinese of doing what the Japanese called haigas, which is they did paintings with short poems. And these are photos with short poems. So let me share my screen here. So this is a series of those, and it begins, when I start doing it here, with the one that was published in the waiting room. And this encouraged me and incited me to write a series called Awaiting. Balconcino Bellino, awaiting tiny Mussolini. And a balconcino bellino is a little balcony. So there he is, if you can imagine him on his little balcony. A first disobedience in wait. Awaiting. Disbeauty, silent storm. Feeding on the dry. Dream of a full neighborhood of shit flooding up. Walking on it, you can't avoid it, this wet mess over door sills. It can't be voided. It's under everything, sometimes flooding up. It carries the shit with it. Snake, snake, and snake, hoping for a funnel down. The neighbors gathered, come in to help with cleanup. I offer coffee and they smile, declining and want to head downstairs. There it's flooding most everywhere, still coming up, and then we're walking in it, like now. Leaning, balancing. Mention hopes. Oh, shark dentalism and rock danger. Redwood step aside. So thank you, Matthew, for the waiting room, which allowed me to kind of take one of my photo haiku, I call them, and then work on this series. So that was really fun for me. And I'll finish up with just a little advertisement because, you know, it's just the way it is. I have a book coming out called In the Pace of the Path. This is the cover of the book. It's forthcoming. This is a advanced reading copy. And it also has my photographs in it, but it also is made up of my poems and stories in a hybrid form. And I'll read one short poem from it. Breath held, waiting for the last lines. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. And what a great closer. Where can people find that book when it comes out?
It'll be on all the different platforms, Amazon and Ingram and all the things that people use. Of course, I always encourage people to buy the books directly from the publisher so they can make a nickel instead of losing money. So the name of the website is rawartreview.com. That's where it'll be featured.
Awesome. Thank you. So today is kind of cool. We had music, art. There was some play aspects, math, so many different genres that came together. And it's really nice to see. I haven't seen Alan in a year, maybe more. It's been a while. It's really nice to see everybody. These virtual events that I'm very happy to have, they are so important to creating access to art, bringing people together from all over the country, all over the world. And it really does prove, like I said before, that as a community, we are strongest and stronger together. I'm going to change our view so I can start the Q&A. I don't want to start the Q&A just on Alan's face. This way we can get everybody involved. So I need to disappear for a little bit. While I do that, everybody watching on the screen, go ahead and connect with us. Oh no, wait. I have to be over here first, and then I can do that. There we go. Okay, now you can connect with us while I pop back over to our group. Here it is. Perfect. All right, so for all our speakers, just in 5 seconds, if you're eating food, if you're doing something weird, now you're gonna pop up on screen. So just a heads up. And we'll begin our Q&A. So before we begin our Q&A, just the power of our art, the power of the community, I want to talk about a little bit. There are days, and I'm sure we all feel these days, we're in the muck of it. We're just, dragging our feet. But seeing you, hearing your work, reading your work, as everybody should, in all books and all kind of mediums and genres and tools and technologies and platforms and everywhere else, it reinvigorates us, and me specifically. And there are days when I just don't want to get up. I'm sure everybody has those days. You don't even want to roll over. You're just nothing. And can this be existence? And the answer is no, because we have to get up. And what this allows and what this does is it has that spark, like Michael spoke about, where a memory or something small can give birth to something much larger. And our community can do the same thing, and it can light that fire on our feet and get us moving and get us to join each other in these readings and then in person and so on. And then we can go do something bigger. We can create something larger than we ever thought possible. And so thank you, everybody, for being here. And just keep in mind, we'll see what the questions become. But I have one written, and this is for anybody, but it's the one that I kind of thought about when MD Berkman spoke about puppets and a puppetry. I'm like, oh, that's really cool. And so this question is for everybody, of course, and just chime in whenever. You don't have to raise your hand or anything like that. Just kind of shout. We don't have to worry about speaking over anybody because we're all here at the same screen so we can see each other. But the question for everyone is, when and if you work in different genres, different means of art, different industries, even like math, like Julia said, how do you decide which one to choose for that specific piece or for that specific memory or for the message you're trying to get out? Do you try, well, I'm not going to kind of lead you anywhere, but how do you decide which one is the most effective for that piece?
Well, I think the piece chooses it for you. Like when I do my reimagined fairy tales, they're very dramatic. And so I have to act out the different parts. And that's why sometimes I use puppets, which, by the way, are puppets that I made when I was 10 years old. And I've kept them. They're hand puppets. I made them with the paper mache head and the little clothes and everything. So they're like little avatars before the notion of avatar existed. And I think the piece itself, I also write songs. they just, they come out. And I think it dictates. But I want to say that, Alan, you inspired me because I also take photographs. But I never thought of putting my photographs and poems together. I guess I thought they would just speak for themselves, but you've really inspired me. So thank you for that.
I have a thought. A writer, and I'm not just talking about fiction. I suppose this applies to poets, but it seems to me that we always start off to write the story that we want to write, but we always end up writing the story that we can write. And that may be kind of a different thing than what you started with, but inevitably you write the story that you're able to write.
Yeah, I mean, I write some creative nonfiction also, but my primary genre is poetry. But even with, choosing the kind of form I'm going to make, I agree to some extent that the form does choose you once you start working with the poem. But so I'm working on my first, never quite try to pronounce this, I think, ghazal poem now. And it's a poem that I want you to use this particular format because I was thinking about, I visited Cambodia a few months ago, and I was just so stressed out. I was so haunted by the acts of the Khmer Rouge, and I wanted to write about that and also about anti-intellectualism. And so it just seemed like because each couplet could be distinct, and because I could name and identify myself at the end, it seemed that this form was really good for what I was trying to do. And it did work out pretty well. It has its, I'm still working on it. There are things that didn't work, but I think it was just in terms of just trying to decide what would work there.
And for me, I think it really depends on the time of when it gets created, like where's my headspace at that time. And sometimes it just gets born out of like, wouldn't it be clever if I do this in relation to that? Like when I'm speaking against structure, writing my poem in a structure to be ironic, or like I feel sometimes when I think of relationships, and I look at graphs, specifically that poem I wrote, I was thinking about how we're just moments in time, and that's pretty much a parallel between my day-to-day life and the way that a function would look on a paper. And so then I thought, okay, so then let's bring in some more math concepts to be able to parallel how it is in a relationship. What are things that come up often? What are things that, are not possible? And when you think of like social constraints, right? And in the social world, in mathematics, you think of an asymptote, something that you could like go towards but never reach. And when we think of attain rows, when we think of where we stand in society, we think of all these different concepts and put it next to these other mathematical concepts. There's some nice little bridging that occurs. So like for me, it's just being able to connect ideas from different disciplines and then just seeing who does this make sense to, like, am I the only one? And I don't think so. I think it's a very human thing, relationships are something that's occurred even before writing. So yeah, that's pretty much how the form gets developed through time.
Well, I hope you all appear or tune in on August 23rd, because the story that I'm going to read from, I wrote Election Day 2016. And I was so overcome by a sense of dread that I wrote a story in the first person, and the protagonist imagines her own death. And talk about the occasion. Well, I was right.
I'm glad you're still here.
Huh?
I'm glad you're still here.
Well, I tried to leave the story like that, where it ends with death, but nobody wanted it. And then I changed it to, oh, was that a dream, or am I coming back reincarnated? And then you snapped it up. So, but I actually preferred it because I was actually contemplating, what does it mean to die? So you'll read what the contemplation was, and then the revival, but it's the contemplation that I wrote it for.
Thank you. So, thinking about how the moment, the time, it chooses the kind of form chooses itself, it just kind of makes sense. I used to always hear, and I'm sure you have, and many other people who are going to watch or are watching in the future have heard things where they say the poem wrote itself, or the story wrote itself, or the painting painted itself. And I always had trouble figuring out what that meant, because I used to think it was, okay, the painting walked over to the palette, picked up a brush, and started putting strokes on there. And then when I really sat down and tried to figure it out and think about it, what makes sense to me is that there are billions of lines that I can write, and then once I write that line, there's only one that comes next. And then the next one, it's deciding it as I'm writing it in that moment. And then I was sitting there and I was thinking to myself, oh my gosh, it's writing itself through me, in my hand, and whatever else. And it's a really cool thing to think about, that before it's spoken, and then Julia spoke about this as we're kind of writing our emotions into existence when they're on the page. When we take that picture, when we speak it for the first time, that's why there's so much power in having readings and having events where we can share our voices, that it becomes real when we speak it, when we yell it, when it's on something tangible that we can rip up and manipulate and so on. But there are so many avenues of places we can go. And then when it's in the real world, oh, maybe it has to be on paper. Maybe it has to be a photograph. Maybe it has to be published. Maybe it has to be math. Maybe it has to be something else, because we're bound by now physics and the laws of physics. Where in our brain, none of that exists. And it's really cool, but it's scary at the same time. And you were reminding me right now, every once in a while, I'm sure all of us, you get that immeasurable sense of impending doom. And then what do you do with it? Do you just sit there? Do you write about it? Do you contemplate things? And what's really great about art is that we can contemplate those things in a constructive, healthy, and progressive and productive type of way, which is, I think, fantastic and scary, but at least we get to wake up. So, which is always good. And I don't have a question, but it's more of a statement. We bring up the human aspect a lot. And what's very difficult, at least from my experience, is separating the human, you, from what you wrote, and also finding the human in what you write. And so now the question is, have any of you ever had an issue or have sat down and really tried to dissect and discover the human outside of everything else that goes on?
I don't know that I understand your question. Can you rephrase it?
Yes. So sometimes when I think of art and music, I think of the song, the music, but I don't often think about the person behind it. And
Think
sometimes
about the composition.
Mm-hmm.
Right. The technical aspect of it, whether it's the note or the word, but you don't think of what brought that person to create that. Is that what you're asking?
Yep.
Or no?
And then in my own writing, sometimes I forget me. And I'm writing about the memory, the experience. I'm writing about the inquiry of the universe that I'm trying to solve or just trying to explore. But I forget, hey, you're a person too, and you exist in this work just as much as everybody else. And so Do any of you ever find yourself going, what about where am I? And do I give myself space or time to exist?
Well, I mean, I think that the relationship between the writer and the writer's experience and what happens on the page or the screen is it's very complicated. I mean, I think that, sometimes even, readers I've shared my work with who are quite sophisticated will say, well, did this happen to you? And I mean, most of what I write that's in a personal voice has aspects of what have happened to me, but I can't, if I wanted to, I couldn't transfer my feelings and my thoughts directly onto a page. And of course, as I used to teach some creative nonfiction, I'd always stress this, that you can't remember everything. If you're going to write something, you're going to have to make some assumptions or make some things up, and they're just not really important things. So it's a complicated relationship. But I mean, the oddest thing that happened to me along those lines was many years ago when I wrote a poem. I was kind of imagining, how I think I'd been reading about human trafficking and written something about how girls might be pulled into this. It was imaginative. And somebody, someplace where I submitted it, wrote back and said, well, thank you for your courage in sharing this. I thought, courage in sharing it, it didn't happen to me. I mean, but I think it's just a really complicated relationship.
Well, I used to be a traveler, and I've had a lot of experiences. And when I came back to New York and I was in writers' workshops, I found that the stuff I made up, people thought was real, but the real stuff they thought I made up.
Yeah.
So people only know what they know. And you want a reader with an open mind. And does it really matter, though, if something happened to you? You're engaging with the ideas. You're engaging with the form. You're engaging with the composition. I mean, I find more truths in fiction than I often do in nonfiction, because the fiction writer is considering the basis of thought and experience, and giving you an example.
I think that there's like an assumption that only what I go in my physical body is the only experience, right? That belongs to me. And I honestly think that we're like spiritual beings living our individual experiences per se, right? In this one body, but are we, or are we all connected through spirit? And so I think that inadvertently, like when we write, who we are as people, as observers, like that always gets incorporated, even if we're not a direct participant on whatever we're talking about. And I think that as writers, we have to be careful and sensitive to that. In that sometimes there's experiences that we ourselves could possibly write about, but I don't know how else to say it. I believe that there's a certain respect due to people who have lived certain experiences, and just bringing light to that. I don't know. I feel like when I write, I'm very cautious about that, because if I'm writing about other people going through their own separate struggles that I personally don't understand, I feel like I'm usurping like an experience that's not mine to tell. But I don't know if I'm the only one feeling that. I know that sometimes using our voice is necessary to be able to bring lights to stuff. So I'm kind of, I know where some of the conversation is going with this, but for me, when you first brought up the question, Matthew, that's not what I thought you meant. What I thought you meant was that do we see what we create as a separate entity from who we are as human beings? That's kind of how I kind of understood it, but I might have been wrong. And sometimes I do, when I create something, I do see it kind of an extension of kind of my perspective and what I've not even lived so far, but understood of the world so far. And my other poem that I have in the waiting room, The Other Side of Our Truth, is all about that, how we're so limited by our own experiences and how we sometimes don't understand what is happening if we just keep our views to just that. So I've spoken too much, so I'll turn it over.
I think there's one time when I'm not sure this is addressing your question, but it is addressing what happens with me. A lot of what I write is non-fictional in the sense that it's all about my experience, but then I fictionalize it. And so my book I call a fictionalized memoir. And that way people know it's not a memoir, and it's also not only fiction. So the point I wanted to make, though, is there's a time when this doesn't actually work. If I'm also a storyteller. If you tell a personal tale that the audience thinks is a personal tale, and you're making the whole thing up, so you are actually fraudulent. You're saying this is a personal tale, and you're getting their sympathy and their emotions. I have a disabled child. You don't even have a child. That doesn't work.
Mhm.
That's not okay from my point of view. If you want to tell a tale about somebody that has a disabled child, that's completely different, but it's the way you present it.
Yeah, I agree with both Alan and Julia here, where it's just like there's certain types of subjects you want to like avoid, and like my personal poetry, like I mix and match like my own memories, which create like things that aren't necessarily true, but they are like, but like they're things that I've experienced, or things that I feel pretty confident talking about, because I'm also conscious about just like being sensitive to certain just I don't want to talk about experiences that I would be completely inappropriately talking about. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. I really like these discussions because they can go in so many, like we can learn about each other, about the art and everything. They're really cool. I enjoy it. I wish you could just all talk to each other. I just get to watch the whole time. That would be my ideal situation. Does anybody have, before I have one more question, but does anybody have any questions yourselves for anybody here or for the group?
I have one. I know that Michael spoke about memory. Do you find sometimes that when you recall, like that memory, of the cat passing away, that because you're recalling it and telling the story and writing it out, that's why some of the emotion gets lost with it? Or do you think that you lose the emotion first and then you write? Or do you think it's the process of writing about it and forming a new association to that experience, which is this new written work that you've created, that actually allows you to go through that process of, changing your emotions from grieving to maybe this is something that occurred, take away the heaviness of that, taking away the heaviness?
I was able to write the story once the pain of loss was over, right? It had evaporated. And, I'm somebody who has always had cats, and I've lost a few. And I know that whenever one of them goes, that it's going to be a painful memory for a long time, for years. It'll be years before it's not a painful memory. It'll be years before I can think of that cat and not feel overwhelming sadness, and instead just kind of think, oh, yeah, that was a hell of a good cat. And it's because you've made peace with it, and you were able to make peace because enough time went by to heal the wound. So, so once I could think of Wolf, the cat Wolf, and not feel what I felt in the aftermath of his death, once I could just think of him clinically, then I was able to write the story, and I wasn't burdened with the emotional pain, and that made it easier to write the story. I mean, I think sometimes we don't write a story because whatever it was that we're starting with is still too emotionally raw, and it kind of erodes our ability to tell the story that we want to come out of that experience. So I mean, I would just say that I had to finally put Wolf in my rearview mirror as much as we do, and then I felt like, oh, now I'm free to tell the story. I'm free to tell this story because it's not going to hurt me.
I just wonder if it's different because it's just like, I know that for me personally, I've written stuff crying, it feeling so heavy. And I've been able to create in that space. So that's why I was wondering about your writing process. And I think that that's the beautiful part, right? That as different writers here, like we have our own process of dealing with emotion. And for me, I could take something that was so heavy and so big, and when I write about it, it becomes small and on a page. So it's something that I don't have to carry anymore. Whereas other people like you're saying that you have to wait for those emotions to kind of like go so you can finally be able to write it and process it. So I was
Yeah,
just wondering.
it really is different for different writers. I mean, some people do well to launch into the story while the wound is still bleeding. And for some, like me, I think it's better to wait for perspective to come much later. And some writers intentionally achieve catharsis by writing about something painful, right? I mean, I remember reading Hemingway said that there were things that he sometimes was able to get a perspective on or feel better about because he included them in his fiction.
On the other hand, when you create or recreate the character, you make that character eternal. And that's giving life.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
maintaining life. And that's what I delight in, is creating the character.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm
life.
so why I'm so pleased about this story being in the magazine is that now my old cat Wolf is immortal, and
That's
people can read it and they can get a little bit of a feeling of how I knew him. And I'm very happy that he has been given a second life.
7 to go.
Pardon?
7 to go. You know, cats have 9 lives.
Yeah, yeah.
Actually, I read recently, and it might have even been in the Farmer's Almanac, that the derivation of that is that people believe that witches turned into cats, and they could turn into cats 8 times and then come back to human form, but the 9th time they were stuck as a cat. So there's something for you to think about for your next story.
I'll mention that to the two that are sitting just off camera here.
MD, is that painting by you, the painting behind you?
You're unmuted. I mean, you're muted.
You're muted.
No, it's by a ex-girlfriend of my husband.
It's a great painting, what I can see of it.
It's okay. We have better here. By other friends.
Salty.
It's a good size.
I'll take that under advisement. It works well on Zoom.
Right. It makes a good backdrop.
Exactly.
Right. And it has a sun in it. And I think at a certain time, my husband liked to get art that had suns, especially setting suns. But we have a lot from friends of former employees of his, some artwork, and other friends of ours. But I'll tell him that you complimented.
That's great. Do you ever, anybody have trouble trying to figure out what goes behind you when you're on Zoom? So my last question, again, it's for everybody, and unless you have any, also, then this will be our last question tonight. Is it kind of is sticking within our topic so far. When you have a need, not just because you want to create something, but when you have a need to create something, but you also have that sense of, I want to do nothing for forever. How do you, or can you, or what's that process like, getting through that barrier and writing the first line, or opening the paint can, or something? How do you fight it, if you fight it, when you have that, oh, I gotta write it, I gotta get it out, I have to get out there and create, I have to be active, and yet you're in your PJs, like, not today.
I feel like I'm someone who's very good at identifying when I have, it feels like there's like this creative energy like in me that whenever, like, I know it can be productive, and I really can't get anything done if I'm not in that mindset. So I don't really, unless I'm in that mindset, I don't really like try to do anything. Otherwise, I keep pretty extensive journals of things that have that I've been keeping for like 16 years now. So I try to, like, anything big that happens, I try to just go about that as objectively as possible and write that down, like, in the moment. And then eventually there will come a time, whether that's like next week or 5 years later or 10 years later, that I'm able to like write about that, and then I can also reference what I wrote about, like at the time it was happening. But I really hate when I'm like just sitting at my computer, just not productive at all, because that makes me feel like the most worthless, and it's never as good as when I'm like in that weird energy space.
Oh yeah, definitely be in the flow. Like, it's so easy, right? When we're in the flow, like, we could just write and it be amazing. But yeah, those moments that you just kind of don't want to do anything. And if I get an idea, like, I will want to write about this. Like, I'll go to the notes on my phone and just kind of like type it out real quick. Like, this is an idea I want to write about, but I'm not in the space right now. I try to respect that space, because I do think that there's a thin line between falling into that space for such a long time that you don't create for years or for months at a time, and also respecting that sometimes you need that creative energy to come through you. But ironically, I think that once I start writing, I get it. It's just like, I just have to snap out of it, and being surrounded by like-minded individuals, going to open mics, that's really inspired me to write again. Meeting up with my friends, having writing time, meeting with other poets, and being able to discuss ideas, and then that brings forth other ideas to write about. It's just, we're connected, as spiritual beings. So I think it's so important for us to create that flow in one another, because me by myself, I'm like a conduit with nothing connected to me. But when I'm connected with you all, then I believe that that's when I could create, even though I might be down or be like, fuck this, I don't want to write right now.
Yeah, I find when I get into those moods where I really don't want to do anything, that I mean, I'm actually a pretty active person. So when I get into those moods, I have the urge to try to push myself out of it. But really, I think if I stay there for a little bit, just as I think Julia said, kind of respect that feeling. Eventually I get bored. And I'll either go out and do something that stimulates me to write again, or maybe I'll sit down and write. But, I think sometimes, my mind, my body just sometimes rebels against the demands I try to put on them.
Well, for me, it's like swimming. Once you're in the water and you start, you get into it. But sometimes getting into the water, oh, it's too cold. Oh no. But once you start. But for me, it's a question of budgeting time. I have to make money. I do that by editing and proofreading. I try to set aside time, but sometimes the project takes over. But I do find that if I have the time, once I actually start, and again, it's getting into the story, getting into the character, and then the character kind of wants to live. The story wants to live. The poem wants to keep going. You just gotta get in there. And but for me, I mean, it's something that I have to do by myself. And when it's good, that can be a problem too, because I want to get up in the middle of the night. Not that I haven't gone to bed like, only 1 hour before. And wait a minute, I have to add that. And then I used to paint, and I had to stop painting because I would just stand there for like 12 hours and paint and paint and paint. At least with writing, especially with computers, you can go away and come back. First time your word processing came out, I mean, I was there. That was the greatest thing. I have a friend who called his computer a poetry making machine.
I found recently that dreams were kind of starting things for me, which I don't think that was true up until the last few years. It's not that I never thought about them, but they kind of incite things now.
Well, I usually dream when people are dying, so
well, that'll incite something.
No, yeah, like a terrible feeling.
Yeah.
I used to write up my dreams, but I don't anymore. But my characters have dreams. So I don't know if I'm really pulling from myself or I'm putting myself in the character. It's all me anyway. Even though, especially on the novel I'm working on, I won't call it autofiction. It's more like biofiction. I know certain things happen to certain people, and I'm trying to imagine the backstory. Why did that person do what they did? So, and I guess we can do that with ourselves. Why did I do what I did?
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody. Does anybody have any final thoughts for the YouTube stream? What I'm going to do is we're going to be no longer live on YouTube, but then we'll be able to stay a little bit, decompress, say goodbye, and that way we don't have to just go, click see ya. It's a little bit softer. So thank you everybody for tuning in. Please connect with us. All the socials are back up on the screen. Join our next open mic on August 8th Yeah, I mean, our next, Julie, I do so many open mics. I'm just saying open mics. Our next virtual reading for The Waiting Room, August 8th. And then there are many, many, many to come. And so we will see you all later. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for reading. Thank you for tuning in. And we'll see you next time.